Hello, everyone. First, thank you for inviting me. Thank you to the UEF organizers for inviting me to chair this panel and to be one of the co-chairs of the conference. My pleasure to be here today. Apologies, my colleague Nihan Al-Kiadi had to leave because we're running slightly late. And apologies as well, some construction works just started as we're starting this conversation. So brilliant timing. Anyway, I hope you can hear me and see me all right. So today, we're here to discuss relationships between public and non-public organizations, not just financing organizations, but also other sorts of private or non-public organizations in financing sustainable urban development. And so my name is Patricia Canalias, and I'm a departmental lecturer at University of Oxford's Department for Continuing Education, where we have a program on sustainable urban development, a master's program and a PhD program. That's why I'm here. I guess so in that, and hopefully I have some knowledge on the area, but really this is about the panelists, and it's a chance for them to tell us from their experience the challenges they might not face in financing sustainable urban development. So we have 6 panelists here today. I'm going to introduce them in the order that I'm going to ask them to speak. I'll ask them if they can stick to their 5-7 minutes presentations because of time management reasons. And then at the end, I'll try and perhaps if there's questions from the audience, I would appreciate if you could either ask them or type them on the chat box. And we will try and get 1 or 2 questions if possible to make justice to the conference format. And I'll then try and just wrap up with perhaps a couple of bullet points on what we all try and discuss and agree or disagree in this 1-hour presentation. So without further delays, our first speaker, Anna Bayão, I thought could be our first speaker as Deputy Mayor of Toronto. I don't see her online yet. If I don't,
I'm right here.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so let me just run through everyone. Anna Bayão is the Deputy Mayor of Toronto and Chair of the Planning Housing Committee. Then I'll ask Professor Graham Carr to speak. He's the President and Vice Chancellor of Concordia University in Canada. Then I'll ask Jan Vapavuri, sorry for the mispronunciation, former Minister of Economic Affairs and former Mayor of Helsinki, Finland. This will be followed by Tyler Halley, a real estate investor and developer focused on private-public partnerships with a particular interest on office to residential conversions. And then Jane Henshin, a project director at Cadogan, and finally Afolabi Oliver, Director ESG Officer at Axia UK. So thank you very much for everyone for being here. Anna, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, and it's a pleasure to be here with you from some in Toronto that had the opportunity to come and visit our great city. So if you're visiting, welcome. I hope that you take the chance to visit around, and for the ones that are virtual around the world, whenever you have a chance, please come by and visit this great city. I'm going to be talking about very specific tools and things that we've been doing in the city of Toronto. We had a pre-call, and I was sharing some of the experiences and tools that we've been using with Patricia, and she thought it would be interesting to bring some of those experiences in here, and in particularly around housing, even though that I'll touch a little bit on our green bond, which I think is something that the City of Toronto is also one of the tools that I think is also interesting as well. And this is a very good topic. I think every city faces a lot of complexities, and money is always short in any. I haven't met a municipality that doesn't have financial issues, and now having sustainable financing and ensuring that is a presence it makes it even harder, and especially on the eve of a pandemic, right? And if we had issues that were persistent and present in our cities, many of them were definitely made a lot worse with the pandemic. And in Toronto, for example, one of the things that we realized was our shelter systems. And before the pandemic, it would cost about $4,000 an evening to shelter somebody in our shelter system. And we have every given night about 9,000 people. And the pandemic hits, we had to create more physical distance. We had to rent hotels. It is now costing us about $6,000 a night. And so what we had to do was to pivot very quickly for a model of creating supportive modular housing. So not only that we were going to create that housing quicker, that we could finance it, and we could, instead of spending $6,000 or $4,000, we're now spending by housing, which is not only a more humane but also more fiscally responsible way of doing things. We're now spending $2,000. So after looking at the math, we realized we can't be building more shelters. We have to pivot to this supportive housing. It is a more humane and a more fiscally conservative, effective way of doing this. So this is something that we've been doing in our housing program and started during the pandemic, and we've been very aggressive. We had a plan in the last 2 years to do 3,000 supportive housing placements. We actually exceeded that. We're on target by the end of the year to do 3,300 supportive housing placements. Another program that we launched as well was the multi-unit acquisition program. So we have a program in the city of Toronto that we partner with the nonprofits to buy rental properties, small rental properties. And this is in order to save that stock, to create affordable units. And so we basically give the down payment to nonprofits. So we leverage their capacity of running these homes, and we leverage their capacity in a lot of times their own investment. So this program was also launched during the pandemic. It's called Mura, and it's been successful. Another thing that we've pivoted lately as well in the housing world, and I'm focusing a lot because I'm chair of planning and housing. So a lot of these tools that we've been using to create more housing is the ones that I've done quite a bit of work. One program that we've launched in the city of Toronto is called the Housing Now. The city of Toronto used to divest its lands. So we used to sell the lands for highest and best use. And what we started to do, it was using that land to partner with the private sector and with the nonprofit sector to create housing. We currently have 21 pieces of land. We are committed to create 40,000 units in the city of Toronto of affordable housing in our 10-year housing plan. At least 10,000 of those are going to be in our land and are created through this partnership with the private sector and the nonprofit sector, where we're using our land and the values of our land. So that's another program that we've done. I also wanted to brag a little bit, because I think the city of Toronto has done this, quite well. We're I believe, still the first city, the only city in Canada, and the first that has an ESG report, an annual ESG report. And I think we were also the first ones in Canada to have a social bond and a green bond. So we have done this on several occasions. The social bond was launched in 2020, and it is to fund many of our housing projects. We had the city inaugural social bond was about $100 million, and it was to finance our housing and shelter infrastructure. Our green bond was launched in 2018, and we've already had 3 tranches of those bonds. It's over $600 million now, and it's to fund a lot of the green infrastructure. We have a very ambitious plan. It's called Transform TO, and the green bond is going right into funding many of those initiatives here. And so I just wanted to put these two tools out there, because we're very proud and of these tools, that they have been successful, and we're proud to put them forward. And I still think we're one of the first ones to have these tools out there, both the social bond and the green bond.
Thank you so much, Anna. I wish we had more time to go into the details of the workings of those two instruments, but perhaps during the question time. So thank you so much for sticking to time. So now I'll give the floor to Professor Graham Carr, please.
Great. Good morning. Thanks very much, Patricia. Thanks for the opportunity to participate in the forum. Let me begin with a very quick description of Concordia University and a portrait of the Montreal University sector to more broadly explain why and how higher education needs to be engaged and contributing to the mission of sustainable finance. So for those of you who may not be familiar, Concordia University has 51,000 students from 155 countries on our 2 campuses located here in Montreal. And for the past 3 years, we've been ranked by QS in London as the top university younger than 50 years old in not just Canada, but all of North America. But in terms of sustainability initiatives, in the 2022 Times Higher Education Impact Rankings, which measured more than 1,400 universities around the world and their work toward attaining or advancing the 17 SDGs, Concordia ranked 20th in the world for our work on climate action, 5th in the world for our work on sustainable cities and communities. For the past 20 years, we've also been the most energy efficient university in Quebec. What I'm trying to say is that sustainability is core business for us. For the international audience, I think it's also important to understand that Concordia is part of a very large higher ed ecosystem in Montreal. Together with Boston, Montreal has the highest concentration of higher ed institutions per capita in North America. And in August, the Chamber of Commerce in Montreal released a study indicating that Montreal's universities bring more than $4.3 billion in direct economic benefits to the city as a result of our expenditures. So I think the point I want to make is that universities everywhere are engines of economic activity, and that's why I believe there's an opportunity to focus attention more intensively on how the operations of universities can contribute to sustainable finance initiatives. And to illustrate this, let me give you 3 quick examples of what Concordia is doing. First, we've been trying to integrate sustainability objectives in our own financial planning and how we behave as an organization. In 2019, our Concordia University Foundation, which has about $358 million in assets, became the first foundation in Canada, first university foundation in Canada to commit to convert its investment portfolio to 100% sustainable investments by 2025, and we're on target to meet that goal. At the same time, we also committed to doubling the social impact investments. Anna was talking about affordable housing. That would be an illustration of one of those areas. Another example of our behavior as a financial organization is that in 2019, we also became the first Canadian university to issue a sustainable bond. So obviously we're aligned with what the City of Toronto is trying to do here. We issued a $25 million 20-year bond, which helped finance the construction of a new LEED Gold applying science hub on one of our campuses, a science hub which is actually very focused on sustainability and ecosystem research, which we opened in 2020. And last week, we announced with the Bank of Montreal that we became the first university in Canada to conclude a sustainable linked loans arrangement, whereby Concordia gets a preferred funding arrangement from the bank tied to our performance in meeting sustainability objectives, which I think is a very innovative strategy. Second major area where universities can contribute to the discussion of sustainable finance is through our academic operations and programs. We are universities after all. We're in the business of training undergraduate and graduate students. And here our John Molson School of Business is already partnering with Manulife Investment Management through a sustainable investing practicum for our students. We offer a sustainable investment professional certification as well. And we place a number of our undergraduate co-op students, et cetera, in financial institutions focusing on sustainable finance. So the training of next generation sustainable investors is also, I think, core mission for universities. The last point I want to touch on is the role that universities play as anchor institutions in cities and communities around the world. In addition to our research and training mission, we have the opportunity to be important conveners, bringing multiple sectors of society together to engage on critical issues such as sustainable finance. And to illustrate, this past spring, the City of Montreal made a commitment that all existing buildings would need to be powered by 100% renewable energy by 2040. It's a great goal, but we know that many developers in the construction and real estate sectors don't have an idea how to become climate neutral. And so drawing on the expertise that we have at Concordia through our Next Gen Cities Institute, our Center for Zero Energy Building Studies, but collaborating with experts across all sectors in the university, we created the Montreal Climate Partnership's Zero Carbon Buildings Accelerator, the goal of which is to work directly with developers to make their business plans align with the city's new commitments and to help them tackle all of the relevant challenges. And obviously, innovative long-term financing will be part of that. Finally, on the importance of partnerships, and Anna mentioned Toronto's commitments to ESG. This year, Concordia also teamed up with a handful of other Canadian institutional investors to create the Great Canadian ESG Championship, a competition to find the best ESG asset managers in the country. This is based on a UK model. And in our version, in the Canadian version, more than 55 asset managers across the country will compete to win part of a $75 million investment mandate. And we're putting our money where our mouth is by contributing $15 million from our university's foundation toward that asset fund. So those are just a few examples of what we at Concordia are trying to do on the sustainable investment front as an urban institution. And we're eager to find other opportunities to do work in this area.
Thank you so much, Graham. I think it's a great illustration of the range of things that how universities can engage in the issue of financing sustainable urban development. Being based in the UK, it's also quite significant that universities are oftentimes very large owners of property, very large property portfolio owners, and in that sense, once more, they have the chance to shape the futures of towns and cities, and sort of infuse places with new ways of managing their portfolios and our housing stock more generally. So thank you so much for your insights. So I will now ask Jan Pavuri, for apologies again for the probable mispronunciation. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. No problems at all. I have to say that I don't think I have never met anyone outside from Finland who would have been able to pronounce it better than you just did. And thank you for this opportunity to address this really important forum once again. As said, I have been sitting with the Finnish government for 7 years in a country which has committed to become carbon neutral by 2035. After that, I spent 4 years as a mayor, city of Helsinki, which is committed to become carbon neutral by 2030. And now I'm representing a Denmark and Copenhagen-based real estate developer, NREP, which is committed to become carbon neutral by 2028. So I'm afraid that I can't continue on that path very much more, because much more ambitious can the goals not become. Anyhow, when I combine my understanding of cities as the former mayor of Helsinki with my understanding of building cities as the current senior advisor of NREP, I think the single most crucial factor impacting sustainable urban financing is bridging the gap between cities and the private sector. Cities are the economic engine of the world. They currently represent more than half of the global population, 80% of global GDP, and by 2050, close to 7 billion people will live in urban areas, much of which is still to be built. This translates into one of the biggest investment opportunities of the next decades. Based on a recent white paper we created with systemic, even conservative estimates, suggests that business opportunities related to more sustainable cities could be worth over 3.7 trillion annually for the private sector by 2030, with the potential to generate almost 170 million jobs and tackle major public health costs, including those linked to air pollution. But only if capital is efficiently deployed into a new type of built environment, which is low carbon, nature positive, circular, resilient, and inclusive. There are many ways in which the current built urban environment does not work optimally. Urban sprawl or poor use of urban space is prominent in almost all cities, biased to make upfront construction costs as cheap as possible. The underinvestment in life cycle performance. The quality of construction is not optimal, even in cities like Helsinki, where there is no lack of resources or know-how. These issues are true for almost all classes of buildings, and is also true across most geographies, even if the specifics will, of course, vary. Clearly, we can't keep doing things the way we have been doing them for way too long. If we are not able to accelerate positive change, the built environment will keep accelerating climate change and feed into financial instability and further climate risks. It will also deepen inequality and social challenges. Globally, real estate is the biggest asset class on Earth. Climate-related investments are, and increasingly will be, a huge cumulative investment. Based on our study, private finance will likely make up 80 to 90% of total investment in the transition, meaning investors have an intrinsic interest to help transform the design, build, and operation of the built environment to drive positive asset values over time. One of the greatest obstacles then for the private investors to step up and for cities to take advantage of new climate technologies and innovations is the lack of dialogue and profound understanding between the public and private sectors. Businesses still don't understand how cities work. Cities are still too far from understanding the way businesses in our current climate work. The lack of common ground prevents us from benefiting from current technological advances, historic innovations, tests, and projects that could forward our ability to fight climate change substantially. We need to bridge this gap before time runs out. This is our mutual benefit and our responsibility to the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan, and again, thank you for sticking to time. So I'll excuse myself for commenting on your presentation, because I think our next two speakers are definitely going to speak to some of the, well, this sort of language gap, dialogue gap, which you've touched upon. So I know that, yes, our next two speakers are going to speak to that. So I'm very pleased to introduce Tyler Ali. Tyler, please, the floor is yours. Tell us from your view from the industry. Tell us about this gap, which I'm sure we've discussed, you've also experienced, you also feel it yourself. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patricia. So as Patricia noted, I'm a real estate investor and developer in the US that focuses on community-centered development. So whether that be through formal private-public partnerships or simply maintaining ongoing discussions with local city staff, we believe that real estate that flows in the same direction as the city's vision is long-term more successful for all parties, including the developer. Before I discuss issues and concerns that we experience, and particularly with that communication, I first want to mention that I've actually been encouraged by the conversation and relations we've had with local governments lately. There's obviously a spectrum where larger, more urban municipalities are more adept at working in these situations, and some of the more smaller suburban cities have a bit more of a learning curve. But local planning staff, city councils, and economic development corporations are really finding improved ways to achieve their objectives by working with developers and actively trying to create that dialogue, in my experience. Now, we still do see limitations from the developer side. We so often are shocked when we ask local cities, so what do you want? And their response is too often, no one's ever asked us that before. We all know the private side can be stubborn and want to replace the city's vision with their own vision, but even they, I think, are starting to realize that groups that actively communicate with the city, trying to help the city solve their goals from a financial perspective, are actually getting a little bit ahead. And so we're starting to see a little bit the start of that, and hopefully we see that more and continue. So all in all, there seems to be quite a bit of hope, in my opinion, that this private and public sector working together is going to improve. But what I tend to find to be the most challenging part of this conversation is timing. And so in real estate, we often talk about what best solutions without acknowledging that the cost and benefits of these solutions are extremely fluid. When we discuss housing, some may be for new development, but what happens if construction costs go up? In August, CBRE released that in the US, their forecasted increased construction cost ended up being 14.1%, the highest increase in construction costs since they've started tracking the data. What happens if multifamily construction takes off while single family falls behind, or vice versa? What happens if lenders only want to finance certain types of product? What if land prices increase or decrease? How do local governments make efficient policy decisions when what makes the most sense in 2019 may not make the most sense in 2021 or 2025? A great example of this happens to be an area that I am particularly focused in, which is office to residential conversions. From the city's perspective, I think these conversions have quite a bit of benefit. It adds more housing, it's more environmentally efficient than building a new building, and it can often be done in urban environments with immediate access to public transportation. Deciding on whether a building should be office or residential from an investor perspective is simply a math equation. If an office building costs $100 million, maybe it is too cost prohibitive to convert to residential. But what if the building only costs $70 million? Would that incremental $30 million shift the scales back towards residential? In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen office valuations plummet, particularly in Class B and Class C properties. Work from home is a phenomenon that may have been coming already, but was accelerated drastically in the last 2 years. According to a recent study by Columbia and NYU professors, New York City office values declined 45% in 2020. And you'll see other studies from Green Street Advisors, which say that US cap rates across the nation saw office properties decline 9 to 10%, which in contrast, apartment cap rates went up 14%. That kind of shows you that there's this gap growing between the two asset classes, and that creates a window of opportunity to, in my opinion, create more housing. And so I think we can all agree that the need for more housing and a more diverse housing stock is a top priority for many cities. And I see more and more articles every day about office to residential conversions. And so the only question in my mind is, are they too late? Will this window of opportunity in which conversions are possibly happening with limited government funding supporting them, will that window stay open long enough to allow these conversions to occur? Have there been enough conversations, not just now, but over the past 2, 3, 5, 10 years to prepare them to execute on this while the window is open? Costs are always changing, benefits are always changing. At any given time, there can be new cost-effective paths to achieve a sustainable objective without using significant government funds. And so going forward, I'd love to see the private and public side come together more to prepare to take advantage of these opportunities rather than reacting to the current environment and possibly being too late. From an investor's perspective, time is viewed through the prism of risk. The more time there is to execute, the less risk there is, the more likely they are to execute the public-private partnership. And so in my opinion, that's the most critical factor for achieving these successful partnerships. It is about conversation, but it's all about when we're having those conversations. Are we doing it 6 months after the opportunity arises, or 2 years before we even knew it was going to show up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tyler. Yeah, I think you're raising a very important question, which we're probably going to go back to towards the end, which is, or throughout these 2 days of conversation, how can we improve communication between the different sectors? I think it's definitely a question we all need to think hard about. On your point on timings, I think this links really well with our next speaker, who's the manager of one of the longest portfolios in London, the Cadogan estate. So Jane, please, the floor is yours.
Super. Thank you very much indeed, Patricia. Lovely to meet you all, and just super to be part of this community, and lovely to hear all these different insights. Yes, I'm a developer, so it's really interesting to hear what people have to say. And I am project director at Cadogan. Cadogan is based in Chelsea, is part of West London, and it's one of London's great estates. It's been in the same ownership for 300 years. It's privately owned by an individual family, the Cadogan family, and there's a Lord Cadogan who has got an office here. He's 85 years old, and it's just fantastic to be part of that real old sort of family-owned property approach. The estate developed from farming land, and we've got beautiful maps in the office which show what it was 300 years ago and how it's developed over the years. And currently the value of the estate is between 5 and 6 billion, so it's a substantial piece of real estate, and it's really, really complex. It's in a city, as you say, there's a shortage of housing, and part of how we've developed the estate and how previous generations have developed the estate is to make sure that for the longer term there's a balance in the uses. So just in terms of very, very quick metrics, we've got 9 hotels, 2,200 pupils studying across 7 schools, 15 acres of gardens, 3,000 flats and houses, 300 shops, over 30 restaurants and cafes, an art gallery, a cinema and a concert hall, and also offices as well. And that mixed use of space is really, really important to us because it preserves creating a community and a neighbourhood area that people want to be part of and want to stay within, which is of course part of our longer term. We have got a Chelsea 2030 strategy where we want to do net zero developments, which is really good, but very, very difficult to implement. And it's also just playing to the last point about the value of residential. If we only developed houses in the area, the value of the estate would be very, very much higher. But of course, the flip side of that, it wouldn't be a community, it would simply be a residential neighbourhood. And to maintain the longer term value, we really recognise that the mixed use is a really good way forward. What I thought I'd do is just talk about a few examples of the types of schemes and the types of uses we've got on the estate. We've got predominantly mixed use developments, which include key worker and affordable housing, as well as market let units. The key worker and affordable housing elements are really, really important to us. They are occupied by nurses and teachers and firefighters and people who operate within Chelsea. Chelsea is a hugely expensive place to live, and it's really, really important to us that we've got affordable housing within our mix. We also look after our retailers, so quite often we have pop-up shops with short-term leases, which are really suitable for business startups. And then what we hope to see is that they go from those pop-up short-term leases to perhaps a 3-month or a 1-year lease. And most recently, we've seen a couple of brands go from those 1-year leases to 10-year leases. And that's really tremendous because we've been able to support them as new businesses on the estate for the longevity of their own business, which of course, again, contributes to the area. Managing waste, as I mentioned, we've got a number of hotels on the estate, and they're generally 4- or 5-star hotels, so they have got certain standards in terms of food preparation. And of course, we all know about the food waste that can be generated by hotels. We've got a restaurant called the Ugly Butterfly. The Ugly Butterfly takes the waste from the hotels, or the food that the hotels wouldn't naturally use, and cook it up in a local restaurant, which is really, really good to hear. We work within a single local authority, Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and that relationship with our main local authority is absolutely key to make sure that we get balanced mixed-use developments that really contribute to the area. And because we're synonymous with the area, having been here for 300 years, we are really dependent on our relationship with our local authority. We aim to be the best local developer in the area, if not in London, and for that reason our standards are really, really high, particularly in terms of architecture. It's a really, really beautiful part of London. Pont Street Dutch architecture, which is beautiful red bricks and beautiful gable ends. Really, you know, that is part of being in Chelsea, and again we want to promote that and do that in terms of our developments. So over the next 5 years we've spending approximately $500 million in terms of development schemes coming up, and of course to do that successfully you need to work really, really closely with our suppliers to ensure that they're aligned with our values. And reference has been made to the circular economy. That's key to our values. And also, of course, we want to make sure that the developers manage our waste properly and make best use of available expertise and the best way of building things and sorting through waste, etc., and using water conservatively. So all of these aspects go into choosing who we work with. Post-pandemic, you know, the estate has changed, and the estate has changed slightly because, of course, we all know that there's been a move towards home working, but there's also been a move in the area from much more tables and chairs outside on the street, much more sort of external cafe culture, similar to Europe, and that has been really welcome. Prior to the pandemic, we had about 200 tables and chairs outside, and currently we have over 1,000, which is a really super position to be in. We had to work really hard with our local authority in order to achieve that, and whilst it may sound like a small thing, it meant a huge amount to our food and beverage operators, our cafes and restaurants. During the pandemic, we also supported local charities, the hospitals. We provided hotel rooms for key workers to use, and we also provided parking spaces. Whilst it may sound like a small thing, you know, that meaningful input every day makes a really big change to how we were able to support those who were looking after us during COVID. We also provided rent concessions because, of course, once we emerge from the pandemic, it's really important that our retailers and operators are still in business and are able to operate commercially. So turning now to procurement, and again, you know, we've heard a lot about how developers invest in property. Our developments are largely for the long term. We tend only to progress with developments which provide typically around about a 15% return on our finance invested. We are self-financed. We have got some long-term borrowing facilities, but generally our developments are funded through our income, which again is a really good position to be in. And we've got a number of larger schemes, 65 million plus, that will soon start on the estate. And then again, to look at the longer term aspirations of the area, we've recently invested £46 million in paving and greening one of our leading luxury retailer streets, because we recognise the need to support even luxury retailers in this time when bricks and mortar retail is becoming less common. And so thank you very much indeed, and I hope that's given you a quick insight into Cadogan. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you so much, Jane. And I think you just given us a very insightful view of the extent to which timing matters in this issues, particularly, you know, commitment to place, which is a possibility that large landowners for the long term have. So last but not least, I hope our final speaker can sort of bring together this idea around the communication between the different sectors, because I think that's what he does for a living. So Folabi, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patricia, and hello, everyone. So I'm Axia's ESG officer. Axia is a global investment consultant. We're headquartered in New York, and we advise on over $270 billion worth of assets for over 100 institutional clients. We also work with sovereign wealth funds who are not included in that number of 270 billion. So in short, we see and we have sight vision, we advise on substantial assets going into these types of opportunities that we've been discussing. It's a privilege to be here today to discuss this with you all. We focus primarily on alternative investments. So that ranges from hedge funds, private credit, real estate, infrastructure, and real assets and private equity. Because our clients include both public and private pensions, endowments and foundations, other cross-border institutions such as development banks, also sovereign wealth funds, a lot of our clients are focused on allocating capital to sustainable investment solutions. And the motivation for that may often come from their association with a government or state organization. It's a global client base, so that's a mix of different institutions with different priorities who have focuses in different parts of the world and have different mindsets and approaches in terms of what would be considered sustainable and what the goal should be in trying to achieve that within a city. But the role of not just private finance, but particularly institutional capital is crucial for sustainable cities. And one of the reasons, because the solutions are often capital intensive. So you require a long-term investment in substantial assets. You require the capital to invest in research and development and technology. And we find that to be quite well suited for multi-year drawdown fund structures that you would see in private market asset types. So private equity, real assets and infrastructure and real estate typically. With the advent of ESG, it's become increasingly important that we are able to partner with our clients to help them navigate the space and that we can identify credible investment opportunities for them. So one of the things that we do is we maintain a pipeline of ESG and impact funds that are fundraising in the market, and we see a range of different approaches and different strategies. The sustainable urban element to this often comes across in terms of both environmental and social aspects in terms of these targets. We ourselves are a signatory of the UN supported PRI, so these principles are a kind of high level reference point for us. And particularly when it comes to identifying what we would classify as impact opportunities, we look to see evidence of the Sustainable Development Goals. Our position in the market means that we're quite privileged in being able to see many of the different opportunities and creative investment solutions that GPs and investment managers are able to devise to approach this area. We've due diligenced over 3,500 funds in our history, so there's no shortage of different approaches. But I think the two asset classes that are definitely most relevant are real estate, which we've heard a bit from real estate already, and infrastructure. Some examples in the infrastructure space that I think are quite interesting in terms of what we've seen recently. So funds focused on the developed markets globally, looking to invest in infrastructure assets that effectively reduce CO2 emissions, and with a mixed composition in terms of investment types. So maybe kind of around 50% brownfield assets, and then a smaller allocation to greenfield assets, which newer assets with capital requirements compared to the brownfield assets, which tend to be more focused on improvement, retrofit, and conversion strategies. And then supporting that is the tech solutions which relate to both types of assets. And that fund would target SDG 11, which is focused on communities and cities, but also some of the other sustainable development goals. So thinking about affordable clean energy, responsible consumption, climate action. These shows the interrelation between the different sustainable development goals actually, and how you need to focus on not just one, but the solutions are multilateral. And I think what's interesting in this strategy is that it's really considering the city's impact on global emissions, as well as just thinking about individual assets, and really trying to map that expected continued trend of urbanization across the globe, and the fact that we need solutions to make our cities more sustainable and to reduce the carbon footprint. So examples of investments might be electrical vehicle charging point infrastructure, wind energy development. And then a different fund that we've looked at is a bit more focused more globally. So thinking about mitigation of climate change impacts, and which aims to actually invest in more inclusive solutions that would reduce inequalities alongside the environmental goals. This fund is interesting because actually the carried interest is linked to achieving the sustainable development goals. So they've incentivized their investment teams through that economic lever. And there's more focus on non-OECD cities in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, or Central Asia. And one of the key differentiators that they would point to is the key focus on building relationships with cities and municipality authorities is part of the investment strategy. It's integral to their ability to actually invest and to source solutions is to be able to build those relationships. So examples here might be transport opportunities, for example, electric buses is one that we've seen. Waste and water management is very important in a lot of these types of regions which are growing and developing cities. And then it can also be something simple, just upgrading streetlights to sustainable electronical devices. So the key here is really around either co-development with the city or an outsourced tender process, which then allows the private capital to come in under specific guidelines and to meet the aims of the city. And then the other area where we've seen is the real estate, which we've talked about, but opportunity zones, I think, was quite an interesting example of where there was potentially some challenges in terms of the potential for gamesmanship. So in the US, that opportunity zone policy, the designations were based on 2010 census maps. And what we actually saw was some of that capital was going to areas that were effectively already gentrified. And it wasn't really achieving the aims of improving the lives and the societies of those particular areas. Other things that we've seen in real estate, so a lot of our clients are actually interested in long-term residential real estate opportunities, maybe multifamily units. Some of these will have below market rent rates, developments in what would be traditionally blighted areas with a focus on economic and social uplifting of those inhabitants of that community. And then rent caps. An interesting example, again, of that interaction between the public and private is one GP who actually approached the local tax authority to effectively horse trade on tax breaks, and in exchange they agreed to include a number of affordable units within their development. So that was an interesting example of the public-private interaction and how that may be used to achieve certain aims which can make a city more sustainable. I think just to sum up, I mean, we see a lot of exciting opportunities in this space, and we expect that there will be continued demand for these types of investments from our clients. And this may be framed through an ESG or impact lens, but I think a lot of these opportunities may just be considered more of a general infrastructure or real estate allocation with time. So some of our clients have actually stated that they're struggling to find enough opportunities to allocate capital to. So I do believe the demand's there, and hopefully we'll continue to see more partnership and more investment into these spaces. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Falabi. And again, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, which I'm sure I am. So I think you also touch on this point, which the previous panels touched, which is there is money out there. It's just, it seems like the dots, we're not managing yet to connect the dots very well. So I think that's an interesting sort of takeaway point. So I'm conscious of time, but since we've started a bit late, I'll just run over for perhaps 5 minutes. I'll just would like to briefly try and bring together some of I think the topics you've all brought up. And I think so I guess we could frame it under this idea of depends on how we frame sustainability. I've heard talking about homelessness, affordable housing, social housing on the chat, but also staff housing or key worker housing. So housing does seem to be a very pressing topic at the moment in many different geographies across the globe. But the way we frame it might actually drive us to different solutions. And we had some solutions ranging from modular housing to more sophisticated products and to this trend towards everyone embracing the ESG's, environmental social governance aspirations. Again, it depends on how we frame those and which sort of challenges that enables us to try and start tackling. So I guess I appreciate and I thank to the speakers who have addressed some of the questions on the chat box. I don't know if there's any question. We could take one question from the audience if someone in the room could mediate that. If not, I would perhaps just ask for everyone to just perhaps leave us with one bullet point idea on what the future of sustainable urban finance could look like, in the sense of what is it that we think is critical in our current state of affairs, and what could be significantly improved if we addressed, say, for instance, and I will start by saying how we frame the problems matters. So if we could go around same order that we spoke, and Anna, sorry to put you on the spot if you're there. If not, for the sake of time management, I'll, Professor Graham, if you don't mind, would you?
Sure, Patricia. So I'm just going to use your phrase. I think it's about connecting the dots and getting different sectors talking to each other and understanding how we can collaborate to address these issues.
Brilliant. Thank you. Jan, please.
I fully agree. I mean, the secret recipe is dialogue between the stakeholders, especially dialogue between the cities and the private sector. And I think that a obvious outcome of this would be a better quality of the investments the private sector will in any case make in urban environments.
Thank you, Jan.
I would add to that by just saying I was going to say dialogue between city and the private sector, but also dialogue between cities across the world and across the nation. Like, there are so many great ideas that don't ever leave the city, and the more those can be shared across different areas, I think the better off we are.
Thank you.
So I think, Patricia, I'd like to lift the horizons for a single year for financial investors, and I'd like it to be more around the Cadogan approach. 300 years was really innovative for Sir Hans Sloane all those years ago, but we constantly look at 10-year horizons and 50-year horizons, and I think really lengthening the period of our investment would really help across all sorts of cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Back to me. So I would say the allocation of capital is, the confidence needs to be provided from the public sector to the private sector that capital, as it's allocated, there is a long-term plan, and that the types of schemes and developments will come to fruition and will continue to receive public and political support as they progress.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for the organization, and thanks for the audience. Apologies for being 5 minutes late, and enjoy your lunch break, I guess, for the ones in Toronto. And thank you all for a smooth presentation without technical glitches. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.